All right. So again, I am Lily. I'm the Regional Programs Manager with Coastal Prairie Conservancy. Thanks everybody for joining. And if you're not familiar with CPC, we are a nonprofit land trust, and we're seeking to sustain a resilient Texas by preserving coastal prairies, wetlands, farms, and ranches to benefit people and wildlife forever. So before we jump in, I'm going to poll everybody just so we can establish a baseline of maybe what you already know. I'm sure we have people of various backgrounds of, education on prairies and grasslands. So you're going to see this pop up on your Zoom screen, and you can tap or click, and there'll be 3 questions, so you can cycle through them. There's going to be a little next button at the bottom. So I'll give folks a few seconds, a few minutes to do this. One is just going to be, what's your background knowledge? We're going to talk about some federal programs to fund restoration efforts through Natural Resources Conservation Service. So we want to know if you've heard of that organization or maybe worked with them before. And then another question related to NRCS. So today we'll be discussing the history of prairies and grasslands in Texas, along with why these ecological systems are so unique, important, and valuable to us all as Texans. We'll also touch on how Coastal Prairie Conservancy and the community are going to work to protect prairies, and as I mentioned, some funding sources that are available to landowners to help and protect their own prairies and grasslands. So today our presentation will be delivered by Bethany Foshée. She is our oversees our outreach programs and stewardship activities on the Coastal Prairie Conservancy. And she's also the project manager for Nature's Burial. It's an initiative by Coastal Prairie Conservancy for Certified Green Cemetery. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Wildlife and Fisheries Science, and along with a Master's in Recreation, Park, and Tourism Science, both from Texas A&M. She's also a licensed funeral director. So thanks for everybody for taking the poll. I'm going to end it now. And we have folks who have a little background knowledge and along with the moderate. So hopefully we can bump people up from a little background to moderate or significant. And we hope, we can continue providing some learning opportunities to maybe get everybody up to well-versed. So I will, turn it over to Bethany, and I invite everybody to listen and learn, and we'll have time for questions at the end.
All right. Thanks, Lily. Thanks, everybody. I have one question. I haven't done a PowerPoint on Zoom in a minute, and I'm forgetting. Can y'all see my notes right now, or do you just see the big slide?
No notes.
Okay, so you see the normal view. That's good. All right, and then my other apology for the day is they're building a house right next to my house. Yes, and of course today's the day where they're doing loud work and occasionally yelling. So if you hear construction in the background, I apologize. Working from home has its complications. Yeah. All right, thanks everybody. We'll definitely have time for Q&A at the end, and Lily will help me with that. And you can also put questions in the chat, and then Lily will read those at the end. So either way, chat, or we'll let you unmute at the end and you can ask us questions. Either way is great. So today we are discussing the critical role of prairies and grasslands in Texas. Many of you are on this call because you're already familiar with the importance of prairies in our state and in our country. But hopefully, as Lily said, we'll dive into that a little bit more this afternoon. There we go. All right, again, there's my contact information, and I recognize some familiar faces here, but there's my email address if you ever need to reach me or have follow-up questions. Also, as Lily mentioned, our mission at Coastal Prairie Conservancy is to sustain a resilient Texas by preserving coastal prairies, wetlands, farms, and ranches to benefit people and wildlife forever. We have a pretty big mission statement, and we're able to deliver on that mission because we are a land trust. So we're able to protect natural lands and working lands in perpetuity. And that's core to our success over the years right here on the coastal prairie. So what is the coastal prairie? Many people are not familiar with this ecoregion that we exist in. So it's really important for all of us to help educate everyone around us because we live in an endangered ecosystem. Originally, the coastal prairie covered approximately 9 million acres shown on that map from South Texas all the way over to Louisiana around Lafayette. And they call that section the Cajun Prairie. We also have friends in Louisiana working hard to restore the Cajun Prairie. You can also see on the map the Katy Prairie highlighted on that map. The Katy Prairie originally covered about 750,000 acres of habitat from around the Galleria all the way out to the Brazos River near where I live in Belleville. A huge region of land that early settlers referred to as a sea of grass and unending swaths of biodiversity. The coastal prairie is endangered. Most estimates believe that around 1% of our coastal prairie remains intact in a state that we call remnant prairie habitat, prairies that have never been plowed under for agriculture and certainly have never been paved over for development. So that's a high bar. We know there are prairies in our state and across the US that exist in a modified state. Maybe there's heavy grazing, maybe there's been light tillage, but we can still see native prairie plants on that farm or ranch. So we know there's a range of ecological health, but in terms of intact, never plowed remnant prairie, pretty rare. This map shows the original extent of North America's tallgrass prairies, which used to be the largest continuous ecosystem on our continent, around 170 million acres from Canada all the way to South Texas. Again, unending seas of grass, wildflowers, and large grazing animals migrating up and down that entire biome. Would have been amazing to see it in that state. Most estimates have come to the conclusion that 4 to 5% of North America's tallgrass prairies remain as intact, never plowed prairie habitat. So we have work to do, which is why we're doing webinars like this one today, and it's why we have the Texas Grasslands and Savannas initiative. So again, the theme for today is why are prairies important? What are the critical roles of prairies? So the most important one from the get-go is it is an imperiled ecosystem. We think about endangered species like the monarch butterfly, like tigers, like elephants, like lions. We think of these megafauna species we've heard of, but an entire ecosystem is endangered, and that ecosystem provides us with ecological services. So the critical role is immense, and just preserving and restoring prairies in and of themselves is top of the list for today. Early peoples who came to Texas recognized values of this prairie habitat. This is an early rendering of the Karankawa and also the Akokisa people, which were found in our region. And these early peoples lived on our prairies and also grazed and hunted on our prairies. This map on the right shows an early Spanish map, and the river there is the San Jacinto River, which this map they had named after the Rio Akokisa people. That name did not stick, but on this map you can see they referred to it because of the people who were residing on our prairies. The Akokisa people did not build permanent settlements. They were a more migratory hunter-gatherer tribe. What they did build were temporary shelters like this one built out of palm leaves. And what we do find from them are their arrow points and their pottery pieces. And we do know one of the last known encampments of the Akokisa people was right on the Katy Prairie near our field office. This is from another tribe. This photo was taken in the late 1800s, and that is a Tonkawa shelter using a bison hide. The Tonkawa also came to the Katy Prairie and coastal prairie habitats, and they certainly relied on the bison for their way of life. As early settlers arrived in Texas, they began to set off tracts of land. Many of us have heard of the Austin colonies, where early settlers were given rights to large swaths of land for ranching and farming. So middle 1800s, Texas prairies began to be heavily modified. And this is where our conversation really begins. The prairie meets the plow. So there's several illustrations here showing the modification that began to happen to our prairies. There's an 1833 steel plow that was actually being advertised for its efficiency. Let me show y'all this too. Oops. Yeah, so the John Deere company began manufacturing iron plows, and mechanical reapers began to replace hand tools that our early farmers here used. And these early tools could replace tools like sickles, and they would turn 2 weeks harvesting into 1 day's work. So the efficiency of scale was great for agriculture in the US. And in fact, in 1862, President Lincoln established the Department of Agriculture. At that time, 90% of Americans were farmers in the 1860s. Today, about 2% of Americans are farmers. So farming land, grazing land quickly took over the tallgrass prairies. Also, Lincoln established the Homestead Act in 1862, which granted title of up to 160 acres of land to settlers who had lived in the area for up to 5 years. So we ask, why does so little remain? Why are our prairies so endangered? Well, it's because of the early intensive agriculture. When settlers came to the Central tallgrass prairies of the US and Texas, there was no impediment. There was no forest in the way. There were no mountains in the way. And there was incredibly fertile soil. Most estimates believe there were about four feet of topsoil on average in North America's tallgrass prairies. That's a lot of healthy topsoil, great for farming. So agriculture began, and over the years, agriculture has become more intensive. Beyond agriculture, development then has followed, and many of us live in areas where there used to be prairie. My home, certainly in Belleville, sits on top of what used to be Post Oak Savanna. And then development for other human uses like solar fields, wind fields. This is also an impact to prairies, and one of the reasons why this is a rarer ecosystem. Also, prairies are rare because they're not as charismatic. If we walk up to a redwood forest, we see those redwoods, we're inspired by them, they call us to action to protect them. Prairies need a little bit more understanding. They are a bit more nuanced of an ecosystem. It takes someone paying attention to really appreciate them. Another reason why prairies are a rare or even endangered ecosystem is because they require what we call disturbance. And many of you on this call know that term, but most people don't. Disturbance means a prairie has to be disturbed ecologically in order for the species who live there to thrive. Native Americans knew this. This is an early artist drawing from 1886 showing the native tribes setting fires in order to hunt white-tailed deer and also in order to improve grazing for those large mammals. So Native Americans knew this, but early pioneers, once they had established their fenced ranches and farms, fire wasn't something that really appealed to them, which we understand. But fires are wonderful for prairie ecology. On the Katy Prairie, on our managed landscapes, we use prescribed fire approximately once every 3 years to maintain good prairie habitat. And we try to follow that, what we believe was the natural cycle of fire in our part of Texas originally. Another form of disturbance that's key to prairie health is grazing. These maps are taken from Dan Worrell's book. There we go. Dan Worrell is a wonderful local author. If you don't have this book, A Prehistory of Houston and Southeast Texas, I highly recommend it. Wonderful resource to get to know our prairies better and where we live. When we think of grazing, we usually think of cattle. We're in Texas. Maybe we think of bison or the buffalo because they're certainly the megafauna that we think of when we think of our grasslands. But even before there were bison, we had early grazers like woolly mammoths, mastodons, all the way to the coastal prairie. And shown in Dan's book, these are fossil remains that have been located across our prairies of both of these species. We also have many records of bison, early horses, and other large early grazers that are now extinct. And of course, bison, we know, are no longer wild on our prairies. Bison disappeared from our part of Texas in the middle 1800s. Around 1850, we stopped seeing migratory bison herds. Largely because they were overhunted and because their habitats had been parceled out, so they could no longer migrate. There are other enigmatic species that we may not see anymore on our coastal prairies. The Outwaters prairie chicken, highly endangered. If we want to see them, we can go to the wildlife refuge or a few private ranches where they've been reintroduced. Pronghorn antelope, Texas horned lizards, the red wolf. These are species that certainly aren't found in urban areas where people live, and they're very rare in our state. And of course, we're working to protect them. But what we want to say is, although some of our charismatic wildlife of the prairie might not be found in small pocket prairie habitats or near human areas, there are many native grassland species that are still out here doing well and respond to restoration very quickly. Some of these, the green anole, you've all seen these before, our monarch butterflies, meadowlarks, and this little hognose snake. Those are some of our prairie species that are still here and appreciate our work to bring back prairies. If you're a birder, you're familiar with the State of the Birds report that is produced by Audubon, Cornell, and other conservation groups. And this latest report update, which just came out this year, shows that there are many groups of what we call tipping point species or groups of birds. And at the very bottom right, you see grassland birds. So grassland birds have seen steep declines in their population numbers since the 1970s. And let me see, sorry. I want to give y'all a few examples. So the American kestrel on the bottom left, they've lost about 50% of their population in the last 60 years. The loggerhead shrike, which is one of my favorite birds, they've declined about 76% since the 1960s. That eastern meadowlark right there on the bottom right that we mentioned, eastern meadowlarks populations have dropped about 89% since the 1960s. And the northern bobwhite, which we can still see on the Katy Prairie. We actually counted about 45 of them near our field office just in the last few days. Bobwhite populations have dropped about 85% in the US since the 1960s. So the common variable in the decline for all of these species is, again, loss of their habitat, loss of prairies. And when we bring these prairies back, these birds' numbers come back as well, which is really encouraging. So that's about biodiversity and about how rare prairies are. So intrinsically, they hold value, but they also have really direct benefits to people. And one of those benefits that anyone who lives in our area appreciates and responds to immediately is flood control and water quality. So prairie habitats on the flat coastal plains are living sponges. They slow the water down, they hold water, they absorb water, and they filter water. We have participated in studies that estimate the value of this ecological service. If you were to have to build storage for what the Katy Prairie can store, which is about 20,000 acres of land, and that's significant retention of water storage during a flood event, that estimate is around $177 million in value if we had to construct something that could protect us as much as the Katy Prairie does. Another study that was done locally recently shows this in another way. They compared different types of land use and how much rainwater can they absorb. A prairie, on average, can absorb about 8 inches of rainwater per hour. Open space, which is partially developed, about 2 inches per hour. A fully developed property with mowed grass can hold or retain about 1/2 inch of rainwater per hour. So significant difference in our native grasses versus developed properties that have mowed lawns and infrastructure. Shown another way, this diagram illustrates where the life is on a prairie. Most of what's happening on a prairie is happening underground, including the plants' lives. Each of our prairie plants, bunch grasses, sunflower family, wildflowers, can live decades to even hundreds of years, each individual plant. So as they grow each year, their top growth above ground that we see may die back during certain seasons of the year, but their roots continue to grow. On the left, you see switchgrass, one of our big 4 native grasses, and you can see the root systems that they put down. Switchgrass in good habitat can put down about 12 feet of root underground. So incredible water infiltration abilities and that sponge capacity of our prairies. Along the same lines, another benefit that prairies provide all of us is carbon storage. Fossil fuels are releasing more what we call greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, into our atmosphere, into the environment. Plants are wonderful machines for converting that into carbon. Scientists and engineers for years have been trying to invent efficient machines that are able to capture that CO2 in our atmosphere and then store it as carbon and possibly even improve our air quality. Well, we already have these machines. They're called plants. Plants are key to the functioning of our planet, and that's exactly what they do for us every day. They breathe in that CO2, they breathe out clean oxygen, all the while building root systems and storing carbon in their tissues. So we appreciate what our plants are doing for us. They're also providing cooling benefits while they store carbon. And this next slide mentions that. So converted open green space, converted back to grassland, can reduce urban temperatures by up to 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Forests and rangelands capture about 25% of global carbon emissions already. So that's already what they're doing for us. And even if you had a small project, a small piece of land that you wanted to restore to prairie, 1 acre of prairie can sequester 5 tons of carbon. So they're efficient at what they do, and bringing these habitats back certainly helps all of us with air quality and cooling in our environments. Another great benefit and critical role of our prairies is habitat supporting our local pollinators, which also benefits local agriculture. So animals, i.e. bees primarily, pollinate about 1/3 of our crops globally. So 35% of our crops are animal pollinated, and many of our crops, most of that number is a species that would be found in what we know as bees. Before World War II, farmers and prairies coexisted. They often used buffer strips between their row crops where they would have native pollinator habitat, including plants like milkweed, bee balm, blanket flower, bluebonnets, sunflowers. Those plants, maybe those farmers called them weeds, but they knew they provided a service through pollination. Unfortunately, after World War II, farming has become more industrialized, large scale, and we also rely on chemical use, on large scale agriculture for pesticide, fertilizing, and so that has led to a steep decline in the use of things like buffer strips and maintaining some pollinator habitat on working lands. On the Katy Prairie right now, we're actually restoring buffer strips on most of our preserves. We've created about 55 acres of pollinator buffer strips along our rice fields, along the edges of our rangeland, in order to help bring back this sort of habitat that's key to our pollinators. So we mentioned local food. Agriculture and ranching is a huge part of Texas culture, and we're proud on the Katy Prairie to still protect working rice farms, as shown in that photo above. These rice farms are providing local food, but they're also providing wonderful wetland habitat for our waterfowl and wading birds. This photo below is from Warren Ranch. Warren Ranch on the Katy Prairie is one of the last large working ranches left in Harris County. It's over 6,000 acres, and much of Warren Ranch is native grassland habitat. Another key value, critical role that the prairies provide for us is our own health, our public health, our well-being. So humans, we forget, especially if we grew up in cities, we forget that we are connected to nature. We exist within this planet. We are part of the ecosystem. So because of that, humans derive innate pleasure from nature. There are many studies that show even having a view of nature outside your window boosts your physical health, your emotional health. And then also park spaces, nature preserves are where people can exercise, where they can socialize and be together. There's a term in sociology called the third place. That's where people can gather. It's not their home, it's not their work, it's not their school. It's where people can gather and be, relaxing, leisure. These are all key parts of our health, and providing nature for people allows them to do that. So this past few years, we've also been working on improving our public access to the Katy Prairie through our new Welcome Center, our bird blind, new trails, because we want people out there enjoying the prairie, connecting to nature, and hopefully getting a spark that might lead them to build a pocket prairie back at home. This is a map. We have a series of these actually, but we're going to show the beginning and the end. So the Coastal Prairie Conservancy, we were formed in 1992. This map shows the development of Houston on the gray area versus that original extent of the Katy Prairie, which was 750,000 acres of habitat. So you can see the green hash mark line showing the original Katy Prairie versus the concrete jungle spreading westward. So there's 1990. If we fast forward all the way to 2023, that's close to where we are today. So you can see two things have happened. We do have a lot more development. Certainly, suburban development has moved to the west of Houston. So we'll see again, there's 1990 and there's 2023. So a lot more development happened, but also what's been happening in tandem is we've been protecting parcels of land that make up what we call the Katy Prairie Preserve System. So we have about 20,000 acres of protected land on the Katy Prairie today, and we're excited to continue protecting more parcels as we expand that. We really like people to get involved with our work and help with restoration at home and on preserves in your area. So some of our volunteer programs we have are Stewardship Saturdays, seed collecting, our native plant nursery, docents, putting down roots, the Great Grow Out, and preserve stewards. We also partner with landowners to achieve significant conservation through our conservation easement program, through land donations, to help push forward land protection in Texas. On a small scale, something we're very excited about is we have been seeing more momentum in the pocket prairie movement, both locally across Texas and even nationally. One of my favorite groups is the Homegrown National Park group that Doug Tallamy started. The mission of this national group is to connect the dots, as shown on this map here, of as many pocket habitats as possible. And then in essence, we could build out the largest national park in our country by connecting many, many, many pocket prairies or pocket pollinator habitats, wildscapes in people's yards. So we love this movement. We love seeing more school groups establishing pocket prairies. We see more of the wildlife habitat signs in people's yards. We support this program through our 9 Natives program, where we showcase really easy to grow, garden friendly prairie natives, through our Great Grow Out program, where you can take home seeds and grow plants at home. And then this next slide shows a little bit more about Great Grow Out. Lan Shin on our staff coordinates both the seed collecting that we do with volunteers across remnant prairies on the Gulf Coast, and then our Great Grow Out program. We take those remnant prairie seeds, we give you some, you get to take them home with a tray, germinate those, take care of them, and then as these 2 volunteers show in the slide, they bring them back to us, to our native plant nursery, to finish growing out and then to plant on our prairies at the end. We also lead Great Grow Out workshops, so if someone wants to build out pollinator habitat or pocket prairie on their campus, we'll come do a Great Grow Out workshop, and they're welcome to grow out those plants for their own pocket prairie as well. I love this top image. One of our Great Grow Out volunteers figured out that his Whataburger cups make great germination containers, basically like a 4-inch pot. So it's a great reuse from Texas Whataburger. Another way people can be inspired and connect to prairies and learn more is just by visiting a prairie. Visiting a prairie near you, whether it be a remnant prairie or a restored prairie habitat. There's more and more choices. The Houston Parks and Recreation Department's doing prairie restoration now, Memorial Park Conservancy, of course, Harris County Precinct 4, Armand Bayou, who's on the call today, and then our own preserves on the Katy Prairie. These are photos at Indian Grass Preserve, which is our home base for operations, and also where our new Welcome Center is being built right now. So we love for people to come out, whether they're visiting or volunteering. You're going to learn something, and you're going to learn to recognize species that we're trying to bring back to our area. At Indian Grass Preserve, we purchased this property around 2002, and you can see it was former crop fields by the past owner. Our field office, which is now our Welcome Center, was also there and used by the past owner, and they had crop production where they were testing different crops, fertilizers. So we wanted to get the prairie back to pre-colonial. We wanted to get the wetlands back and the prairie habitat back. So we began that process in 2014, 2015, where we dug out the wetlands where they originally were, the prairie potholes. And then 2017, we seeded that prairie with help from Wildlife Habitat Federation. So Indian Grass is an 8-year-old prairie today, still a very young prairie, but we love for people to come and visit and see what can happen if you do the work. The Katy Prairie today is a connected system of preserves and working lands. On this map, the brown shaded swath, these are conservation easement properties here, 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 and this little one here. Though that means the landowner still owns their land, but they've partnered with us, the land trust, to protect the conservation values of their land in perpetuity. So even if it's sold or passed down to future generations, this is a permanent protection. That land will remain open and undeveloped. And then the green shaded lands, this is our system of preserves that we own and manage by the Coastal Prairie Conservancy. And then there's our home base I mentioned, the Indian Grass Preserve. What we also wanted to talk about today is our large scale initiatives working with landowners here in Texas. The Coastal Prairie Conservancy, we changed our name 3 years ago because we're no longer just on the Katy Prairie. The Katy Prairie is certainly home base. That's where I work. But we're working to protect lands in this 9-county region. And so you can see these shaded easement properties where we've worked with landowners to protect their lands. And then there's also shown on the map public protected lands and other private protected lands. There's still a lot of work to do. We want to see a lot more shades of green and yellow on this map. And some of the ways we do that in Texas are through landscape scale conservation programs. These include the NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which is our Texas, one of the RCPPs that we manage is the Texas Grasslands and Savannas Initiative, as well as the Texas Coastal Prairie Initiative. These two initiatives are both regional conservation partnership programs that allow us to work with NRCS staff in order to boost habitat values of working lands and protect working lands through conservation easements. The NRCS also has a direct easement program called the ALE, the Agricultural Land Easement Program. This is a great tool if you're looking at conserving your farm or ranch in Texas or anywhere in the U.S. Texas Parks and Wildlife also has 2 great programs, the Pastures for Upland Birds program, where they can provide you with funding to boost habitat for some of our grassland birds we mentioned, and then the landowner incentive program as well to improve habitat. NACA, the North American Wetland Conservation Program, is another great tool that we have used to improve habitat and protect lands through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So many of these are wonderful tools, and if you have more questions about them, we can have time at the end, or we can follow up with you so you can learn more. So we mentioned the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which we call an RCPP. Both TGSI, our Texas Grasslands and Savannas Initiative, and the TCPI, the Texas Coastal Prairie Initiative, these large-scale programs are with many partners, not just Coastal Prairie Conservancy. We appreciate all of our partners because, shown on the next slide, these 2 maps, these extend conservation beyond our 9-county area. So by working with partners, we can then help identify landowners and then help connect them with funding sources to protect their lands and improve habitat on their lands through these 2 initiatives in any of these counties. The Texas Coastal Prairie Initiative is working in 13 counties, shown on the map on the left. And then the Texas Grasslands and Savannas Initiative is working in 16 counties, shown on the map on the right. This initiative, the Coastal Prairie Initiative, has been focusing more on wetlands and species that are found in those wetlands and coastal prairies. And then the TGSI initiative is working on grazing lands, not just on coastal prairie, but also blackland prairie and post oak savanna. We were approved for funding for these 2 initiatives by NRCS. Texas Coastal Prairie Initiative was established back in 2021. Again, we mentioned 13 counties, about $7 million in funding, and then established in 2024. The Grasslands and Savannas Initiative is our newer initiative. Larger amount of funding is available following federal guidelines, and then there's a larger scale, 16 counties, and a focus on grazing lands. There's an example on the right of some of the what we call practices, the habitat management practices that are approved that can be cost shared through these funding resources. And conservation easements can even be cost share funded up to 50% of the value of an easement, which is huge. And we also provide technical assistance for landowners. So first step is just meeting with us, talking to us, seeing what your priorities are, what your hopes are for your property. We do have a deadline coming up October 17th where you would apply for funding, and we could start a conversation with you about what you might want to do on your land. And that's actually my last slide. So in summary, we covered a lot of ground today. Prairie ecosystems are rare. They are disappearing, but there's much we can do to protect them on small scale, be it a pocket prairie in your yard or large scale on your family's ranch or farm. Prairie restoration is always possible, and it's exciting to see how quickly wildlife respond when you begin doing that work and setting some habitat aside for them. Volunteers are always needed, and our nonprofit, the Coast Prairie Conservancy, works with landowners to restore and protect land in various ways. So we'd love to connect with you through the initiatives or just directly. And then again, we mentioned that deadline if you're interested in the funding that's available currently. And then my very last slide, we encourage everyone to connect with us on our social media. We're active on Instagram, LinkedIn, of course, on our website. We send out a newsletter. So please, if you don't get our newsletter, sign up for that as well. And there's my contact information again. So I will stop sharing. And then Lily, if you'll help me, we'll see if we have any questions from our audience today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bethany. It was a great
Sure.
presentation.
Thank you.
Someone asked if we can get a copy of the PowerPoint, and yes, we will send out PDF version of the slides. Kind of mirroring what we did in the beginning, I'm going to send out another poll so we can gauge your learning in this presentation. And one of those questions is going to be, would you like to receive a follow-up email after this? Because the way we have our Zoom set up, if you didn't register officially and kind of just jumped on the call, which is great, we don't have your email recorded. So one of those questions will be, would you like to provide your email to us? So I'm gonna launch this poll. It should be popping up on your screen in the same way. I'll give folks a minute or two to answer those questions. But
And then Lily, I didn't mention, I don't know if you have a slide or we could pull up the web page for our upcoming events, like the workshop we're planning right now for the fall.
yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I was going to share my screen, but if I mess up this poll, you all can let me know.
Okay.
So hopefully you might still see the poll up. If not, somebody please let me know. I'm not sure how this Zoom functions with this, but so I mentioned in the beginning of our presentation, we have one more webinar in our summer webinar series. That's August 27th, also at noon, and we're going to be talking about habitat management on the Warren Ranch, with Bethany mentioned during her presentation. We'll also attach to follow-up materials the funding deadline flyer that we mentioned for the Texas Grasslands and Savannas Initiative and the Texas Coastal Prairie Initiative. And then lastly, I have up right here, we are organizing a fall prairie plant ID workshop. So maybe you want to learn more hands-on about the identification of prairie grassland species. So this is going to be taking place at the UH Coastal Center in Lamarck, and we're limiting to 25 participants. There's a QR code you can scan here and also a link to the registration page. It's $20 for a participant. And in the morning, we'll have some, classroom presentations with some field like ID work. And then in the afternoon, we're going to go outside and work with some local botanists and experts to do some hands-on field identification. And we're partnering to host this event with the UH Coastal Center along with the Environmental Institute of Houston. So there's a few other, let me stop sharing. We have a few other partner events that are coming up as well in the future, and I can send that out with email, but I'll pull the website. So you may have seen it at the bottom of the slides as we were presenting, but we have a website called prairiepartner.org, and we have a ton of information on there regarding the two initiatives, along with some outreach opportunities cataloged right here up in the events section. So if I scroll down, there's also a prescribed burn school event coming up, which is kind of a class. This costs $120. This is hosted by the South Central Texas Prescribed Burn Association. This is taking place in Brenham, and it's a kind of 2-day, or a multi-day in 2 parts. And then also one of our partners, the Native Prairies Association of Texas, the Fayette Prairie chapter, is hosting 5 Tools of Prairie Restoration Symposium, and it's an all-day event in LaGrange, which will be going over kind of Aldo Leopold's 5 Tools of Prairie Restoration: axe, cow, plow, gun, and fire. So that's another great learning opportunity that we're excited these great partners are sharing. And if you've left your email in the poll, or maybe if you weren't able to do that before I ended the poll, you can leave it in the chat. We'll make sure to get these resources to you. Let's see some other questions we have here in the chat. Bethany by Land Conservancy asks, have you been approached by developers? How do you handle the nearby development in terms of working with or against around sprawl on the Katy Prairie?
Good question. Marion, do you want to answer that?
Thanks. The tough ones. Hi, I'm Marianne Piacentini, President and CEO of the Coastal Prairie Conservancy. We make a big deal about saying that we're not against development. We understand that people have to live, work and play, and they want to be near where they want to be. And many people really want to work and live on the Katy Prairie because it's flat, it's fairly cheap, it's easy to build on. And so one of the things we try to do is we do try to meet with developers who are going to be close to us to at least tell them what we're doing, how we hope that they won't impede what we're doing, because I mean, obviously we own our own land, and that, we encourage them to do things that might benefit the kinds of work that we believe is valuable. So for example, Bridgeland has done a really good job in putting in a number of areas in Prairie that they feel are benefiting their landowners. We have the Grand Prairie, which obviously not a lot of it is native, but some of it is native. They've done a really good job in trying to use native grasses where they can, and in showing their neighbors what they can do to be better. We also have a lot of activity from our whole volunteer program. We've got a lot of people who come in from the different neighborhoods around us because they want to see what something is when it looks wilder. I'm also working closely with Houston Stronger, which is really a group that does a lot of work with developers, and West Houston Association, to kind of let them know what we're doing and why we're doing it. And in the beginning, we were definitely at loggerheads. They didn't like what we were doing because we were taking away land that they thought could be developed. But now they're recognizing that we are a major park. I mean, we are, I think 13 times bigger than Memorial Park right now with just the property that we own and protect. And they're seeing that as a value. John Crompton would tell you from Texas A&M that living near a park increases the value of your homes 15 to 20%. And so they're beginning to see that they're very attractive when they their subdivisions, excuse me, are very attractive when they are living near a wild area or a natural area like us. So there's more to be done, but little by little, we're beginning to convince some of them to use nature-based solutions to preserve some of the areas that are nicer in their things, and they're naming them after things that are important, whether it's Mallard Crossing or it's the Grand Prairie, or it's sometimes it doesn't look necessarily like a total natural area, but you know, whatever they can save is worth saving, and whatever we can do to protect more land and to make sure that the prairie is the prairie where it wants to be and needs to be is what we do.
Thank you, Marian. Yeah, it's definitely a continual conversation and lots of communication with many different partners. So there's another question someone asked is, how is climate change, variability of rain, longer stretches of drought and cold and freezes affecting prairie restoration efforts?
Good question. That's a big question. One, I would say there's much we don't know yet. I am not in academia, so I'm not at the forefront of research, but I know there are more efforts happening now, including some PhD students that I know that are exploring this. In terms of boots on the ground, managing our preserves, one good thing is that prairies in our region have always thrived on variability. So a prairie ecosystem can tolerate periods of drought or periods of flooding much better than other ecosystems like the eastern forests, like a broadleaf forest can. But one challenge I would say I've seen in my career is if there are invasive species that are from warmer or more tropical climates where there's more rainfall, higher temperatures. As we see more of those species easily invading the Gulf Coast of Texas, they also thrive on disturbance. So if we do a prescribed burn on a prairie, well, then we know not only will the prairie plants respond well, so will those invasive plants from Central South America and even Southeast Asia. They'll respond really positively to periods of drought, flooding, fire, or heavy intermittent grazing. So when we do a prescribed burn now, we know we have to prepare to do follow-up treatments on species like deep-rooted sedge, king ranch bluestem, Chinese tallow, some of those invasives that really love the habitat on the Katy Prairie.
Thanks, Bethany. And then somebody else asked, will the cost sharing programs apply to Bastrop County? So the Texas Coastal Prairies Initiative and TGSI, Texas Grasslands and Savannas Initiative, they do not include Bastrop County. However, I'm going to put this in the chat. This is a link to other funding sources that apply larger than, kind of our focus is the initiative's 20 combined counties. And I don't know if there's any, there's some other partners on the call. I don't know, Bethany, if you have any, off the top of your head ideas for Bastrop County. But
yeah,
I know
they could certainly reach out to Wildlife Habitat Federation. They work statewide now, and they're from that nonprofit. That's exactly what they do. Work with landowners to improve your habitat, and they can also help connect you with the right funding for where you're at and your size of land and what you want to do.
Yes, definitely. There is also a program called the Small Acreage Restoration Program, SARP, which is being led by the Fayette Prairie chapter of the Native Prairie Association of Texas. And that does cover Bastrop County. That's specifically geared towards smaller acreage restoration projects under 25 acres. So I can just right now, put that in the chat. But, again, as long as you leave your email, we'll be sure to send out all these resources and programs we've talked about as a nice summary.
Lisa, could you maybe answer about some of the other RCPPs? Are there others that would consider Bastrop County that are in the state?
So there's the Oaks and Prairies joint venture that does a lot of grassland bird restoration. And I believe that's in the link that Lily shared about other funding sources. And they cover many, many more counties. It's for habitat restoration. So I would look at that one. As mentioned, Wildlife Habitat Federation, they'll know who, like they can do a conservation plan and help a landowner decide what sorts of practices might be beneficial for their grasslands for anybody. And I believe that's free of charge. I hope I'm not stating that out of turn. And then they can also help identify the potential funding sources. I know, the Pastures for Upland Birds and the Landowner Incentive Program, they also have specific counties that they're active in. And I just couldn't say with Bastrop. I mean, all the links are there and you could look and see what the focus is. For the other RCPPs for easements, there is the additive conservation program that goes a little bit further to the coastal prairie, to the southwest. And so that could cover some additional counties for easement funding. And then statewide, there's the agricultural land easement that covers the entire state.
You, Lisa. Yes, there are definitely a variety of programs. They have different coverages and kind of landowner incentives. So if this is a conversation you're wanting to investigate more, you're welcome to reach out to us one-on-one, and we'd love to talk with you. Marvelyn, who's the vice president of the Fayette Prairie chapter of MPAT, also recommended Will Newman. He is the Farm Bill coordinator for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And if you look up his name in TPWD, I'm sure you can find his contact information. He's a great resource as well.
And someone had a question about Live Oak Peninsula, Rockport, and the Blackjack Peninsula, Aransas. So I'm not sure if those are on the ecosystem map, why those were not identified, if those are more like coastal marsh as opposed to the tall grass prairie. Bethany, do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, that map predates me. So I actually don't know where we got the shapefile for that map. We show the original extent of the coastal prairie. So, some good homework for us to always evaluate maps again. We do that frequently as it is, but I think Elisa's right. I think that shapefile showing the original extent was looking more at upland prairie habitat and not so much the lower saline marsh habitat. And I think that's how that map was delineated, but I didn't generate the map, so I'm not 100% sure. But good homework for us always to evaluate and update our information.
The map was actually created by Texas Parks and Wildlife for us.
There you go. Thank you.
And I will say, like the Rockport area and where Aransas is are both high value conservation areas, that would be included in either the Texas Coastal Prairie Initiative or in the Additive Conservation Regional Conservation Partner Program. So, I mean, they're clearly, habitat that has been identified as valuable and has some extra funding sources dedicated towards it.
Yes, and kind of, to that point, talking about land conservation, we did have a question where someone asked, what are landowners' primary resistance to putting their land under conservation easements or other similar programs? Is it the money they can get from developers or other reasons? Elisa, would you like to speak to that question?
So what's the reason? Oh, prime resistance. No, it's people's land is a really big asset. When you have family land that may be worth, $10 million and maybe you don't have a lot of money in the bank account, people are going to look and see what makes sense for them. The funding sources does certainly pay for part of the easement value, but it's very unusual to be able to pay for all of the easement value. So if someone really wants high as a dollar and they just want to sell to development, it's faster. They could potentially get more money. There's no doubt. So the landowners that tend to participate with easements are those that maybe don't want to see that happen to the land. They're interested in their legacy. They may have children that, that they want to pass it on to, but they want to make sure that it's protected. So it's tough. I mean, with fragmentation and increased land values, it takes the right landowner that wants to do to protect their land, to enter a permanent easement.
Definitely, it's a long, process. It's a in-depth conversation, and everybody, is an individual and is different. But thank you for asking. These all these topics kind of tie together, and how we all can play a part in preserving the coastal prairie. So we are nearing the end of our time today. It's about to be 1 p.m. So I'd just like to, if there's no more pressing questions in the chat, I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and thank you again to Bethany for a great presentation. If you haven't already, left your email so we can be sure to follow up with you, that would be great. And we have that, 2 more weeks. We can see you again on a webinar, but thank you everybody today. Have a great rest of your evening and afternoon.
Really, Marvelyn put Will Newman's email in the chat, so people should pick it up. And also, I think, did you say that NPAT, the Fayette chapter, includes Bastrop County? I missed that because it's also in the chat.
Yes. Yes, so that is in the chat. Thank you for pointing that out, Marianne. Yes, Will Newman, the Farm Bill coordinator of TBWD, his email is in the chat. And the MPAT Fayette Prairie chapter does, is more active in Bastrop County. So those are some good resources. So thank you, everybody.
Thank y'all. Thanks for joining.